The Clockmaker of Evergreen Hollow. Prologue, The Whispers of Time. I don't remember when I first stumbled upon the hidden path. It might have been a soft breeze that guided me, or perhaps the hush of leaves whispering secrets only the trees could understand. All I know is that one quiet afternoon, while wandering through the old woods behind my grandfather's cabin, I followed a trail that hadn't been there before. It curved gently, lined with moss-covered stones and tiny wildflowers that glowed faintly, as if painted by the light of forgotten stars. The deeper I walked, the quieter everything became, not silent, exactly, but still. A stillness so complete, it seemed to cradle every sound. My footsteps softened. My breathing slowed. Even the birds overhead seemed to pause in flight. Then, I saw it. Nestled between two ancient oaks, half covered in ivy and silver dust, was a cottage that didn't belong to this century, or perhaps to any century at all. Its roof was layered in polished wooden tiles that shimmered like fish scales, and its windows were round like clock faces, some turning slowly even though there was no wind. Above the arched door, carved into the wood, were the words, "Time is not kept. It is crafted." And so began my journey. Chapter 1, The Ticking Cottage. I stepped toward the cottage, drawn by a quiet hum, like the heartbeat of the forest. Each step made the world feel lighter, softer, as though I were walking not on soil, but on strands of spun silk. The air itself carried a gentle rhythm, as if even the breeze moved in time with something unseen. The door, though aged and weathered, opened without effort. It sighed gently as it swung inward, revealing a room filled with clocks. They hung from the ceiling, perched on shelves, stood tall in corners, rested tiny on tabletops. But none of them ticked the same. Some moved forward slowly, like drowsy thoughts. Others spun their hands in reverse, as though turning back forgotten hours. One near the door didn't move at all, it only shimmered faintly, like moonlight on water. And there, at the center of it all, sat a man. He was old, but not in the way that made you think of age. More like he had existed for so long that he had grown used to being a part of everything around him. His hair was silver and long, blending into the pale mist that seemed to hover just above the floorboards. He wore a vest with tiny pocket watches sewn into the fabric, each one glowing gently with its own light. He looked up at me and smiled, not surprised in the slightest to see me. "You're just on time," he said, as if greeting an old friend. Though, to be fair, time is flexible around here. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. I didn't need to say anything. Somehow, he already knew why I was there, even though I didn't. "Come in," he said gently. "This is a place for those in-between moments." I stepped fully into the room, and the door closed behind me with a soft click that echoed like a whisper. He gestured to a chair carved from warm wood, its arms shaped like branches, its back curved like a crescent moon. I sat, and the world seemed to slow even more. I could feel each breath stretching out, longer and softer than the last. The clockmaker moved with quiet precision. He adjusted a small pendulum, tapped a gear here, turned a knob there. Every movement he made seemed to resonate throughout the room, as if each action sent a ripple through time itself. "Do the clocks tell the future?" I asked at last. He chuckled, a sound like distant bells. "No, not the future. Not exactly. They tell moments. Moments that matter. Moments you carry with you, even when you forget them." He turned to face me, holding a small wooden clock no larger than an apple. It ticked slowly, steadily. "This one," he said, "is yours." I reached out, and as my fingers brushed the polished wood, images bloomed behind my eyes. A walk with someone I had loved long ago. The feel of rain on my skin during a childhood summer. The scent of cinnamon on a winter morning. Moments I hadn't thought of in years, held gently inside that little clock. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "All clocks are," he replied. "They carry stories. And stories shape time more than hours ever could." He placed the clock in my hands. It was warm, like it remembered me. And then the ticking grew louder, not in volume, but in presence. I could feel it in my chest, in my fingertips, in the space between heartbeats. The world seemed to breathe with it. The clockmaker began to tell me about the other clocks in the room. One belonged to a bird who had forgotten how to sing. Another was tied to the rhythm of ocean waves, collected from a shipwrecked sailor who had spent his final days listening to the tide. "They're not broken," he said. "Just resting. Time, like us, needs moments of stillness." I sat back, letting the hum of gears and pendulums wash over me. The air was thick with the scent of cedar, lavender, and old parchment. Outside, the forest whispered gently against the windows, like a lullaby made of leaves. "How long have you been here?" I asked. He smiled, eyes twinkling like stars that had seen everything. "A while. Or maybe only a moment. Depends on the clock you ask." And that was the first lesson I learned from the clockmaker. That time was not a line, but a river with many branches, and some of them flowed inward. I don't remember falling asleep, or waking up. Only that I blinked, and the world had changed slightly. The air was warmer. The light more golden. My thoughts, slower and softer. "You'll return," he said quietly, not as a question but a certainty. "Everyone who's meant to, does." And I knew then that I would. Outside, the path through the forest had grown over again, but I wasn't worried. I now carried a clock of my own. A quiet, ticking promise that time, when treated gently, would always find a way home. Chapter 2, The Garden Where Time Slows. I returned. Not because I knew how to find the path, paths like that are rarely found the same way twice, but because one morning, as I watched the steam curl from my teacup, I felt the ticking in my pocket. The little wooden clock, warm and steady, called to me like an old friend humming a familiar tune. The forest welcomed me once again. I didn't need to think. My feet simply moved, guided by rhythm, memory, and something softer than thought. Trees leaned gently inward, branches brushing lightly against my shoulders as if to say, "He's back." The path opened like before. It wasn't sudden, it unfolded, like a page in an old book slowly turning on its own. And once again, there was the cottage, unchanged and eternal, its round windows blinking softly in the filtered sunlight. When I stepped inside, the clockmaker was waiting. He didn't say hello. He didn't need to. "You're just in time," he said again with a quiet smile, as though I had never left. The air in the room was different, warmer, somehow more fragrant, filled with the faint aroma of rosemary and lemon balm. He handed me a small brass key, its edges curved like ivy tendrils. "Today," he said, "you'll need this." He led me through a door I hadn't noticed before. It was hidden behind a tall grandfather clock with hands shaped like feathers and numbers etched in flowing script. As he turned the key in the hidden lock, a faint chime rang out, not loud, just enough to let the world know something new was beginning. The door creaked open to reveal a garden. But not an ordinary one. The garden stretched endlessly in every direction, yet never felt overwhelming. It was a place where flowers bloomed in patterns rather than seasons, and the grass hummed underfoot like distant lullabies. Trees swayed slowly, even though no wind touched them, their leaves shimmering in golden hues that didn't belong to any hour I had known. We walked in silence. With each step, I noticed time behaving differently. A hummingbird hovered above a blue flower, frozen in mid-air, its wings motionless yet glowing. Just beyond it, a cat slept atop a wall of moss-covered stones, but the rhythm of its breath seemed stretched. Drawn out. Slower than slow. Why is everything moving like this? I whispered. The clockmaker didn't stop walking. This is where time rests, he said softly. Not everything in the world needs to move forward all the time. Some things simply linger. We came to a fountain, but instead of water, it flowed with strands of light, silvery threads that rose upward like smoke and curved lazily into the sky. I leaned closer and saw something in the strands, scenes, moments, memories. A child blowing out candles on a cake. A couple holding hands by a frozen lake. A woman spinning in a field, arms stretched wide, laughing without sound. I reached out to touch the threads, but the clockmaker gently stopped me. These are resting hours, he said. If you touch them, you'll feel their weight. They belong to others. We sat on a bench that curved like a crescent moon, shaded beneath a tree whose bark shimmered like copper. The bench hummed beneath us, pulsing in rhythm with the ticking clock in my pocket. What is this place, truly? I asked. He looked out over the garden. It's many things. A place for memories that were never made. A place for time to catch its breath. A place to remember how to be still. I closed my eyes and listened. To the leaves rustling like parchment. To the air moving like velvet. To the clocks ticking in the distance, not in unison, but in harmony, like a chorus of thoughts gently unfolding. There is no rush here, he said quietly. That's the second rule of this place. The first is, time can be shaped. The second is, time must be honored. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure what that meant. Still, I understood in a way beyond words. He handed me a small silver bell, cool and smooth. When the moment is right, he said, ring this. But not to hurry anything. Only to mark that something important has happened. I slipped it into my pocket next to the wooden clock. The two seemed to fit together perfectly. We walked a little further, though neither of us spoke. Around us, the garden grew quieter, the colors more subdued, the sounds softer. Even my footsteps seemed slower, as if the earth beneath me was gently holding each one, letting it settle before the next began. Eventually, we returned to the door. Back through the cottage. Back to the chair shaped like a crescent moon. Back to the quiet ticking and the scent of time. As I sat, the clockmaker placed a hand on my shoulder. You're beginning to understand, he said, his voice a thread of warmth. Not everything needs to be rushed. Some stories take a lifetime to unfold. Others take only a moment. I closed my eyes, and in the silence that followed, I could hear the garden still ticking behind my thoughts. Slower now. Softer. Still. Chapter 3, The Mirror That Reflected Moments. There is a hush in the world when you begin to notice your own stillness. Days, or something like days, passed since my last visit to the garden of slowed time. I had returned to my quiet life in the waking world, yet the ticking never left me. Not in a haunting way. More like a soft thread of music playing far off, reminding me that the path to the cottage still existed, waiting with patient certainty. One morning, without deciding, I found myself walking again. The path welcomed me as though I had never left. Dew shimmered on the mossy stones, and the sky above was a soft, pale gold that didn't belong to morning or evening. The air was warm and quiet, filled with scents of old wood, faded lavender, and something softer, like sunlight resting on pages of a book left open too long. The cottage door opened before I knocked. Inside, the room felt different. The clocks still ticked their many tunes, but there was a new rhythm pulsing beneath it all, subtle as breath. The clockmaker looked up from a table of disassembled gears and tiny glass vials filled with starlight-colored liquid. "Today," he said, "you'll see something you've carried all along." Without another word, he walked to the back of the room and opened a tall, narrow door. Behind it, a hallway stretched farther than seemed possible, its walls covered in faded wallpaper patterned with tiny hourglasses and winding vines. The floor was carpeted in clouds. Not fabric made to look like clouds, actual, soft, floating wisps of cloud, gently supporting our steps. We walked until we came to a room with no corners. The walls curved like the inside of a seashell. There was no ceiling, only a slow swirl of stars above, drifting as if underwater. And in the center stood a mirror. It was tall, reaching nearly to the sky, framed in twisted wood that looked like it had grown itself into shape. Tiny golden runes shimmered across its surface, moving like constellations. I approached slowly. At first, the mirror showed nothing. Not my reflection. Not the stars. Just stillness. And then, it breathed. Not a sound, just a feeling, like the mirror itself had inhaled gently, preparing to remember. I saw myself as a child. Sitting beside a puddle, stirring it with a stick, humming a tune I had forgotten until that moment. The mirror shimmered, and the scene changed. Now I was older, standing on a rainy street, watching someone walk away. But the feeling wasn't sadness. It was acceptance. A moment I hadn't thought of in years, resting quietly inside me. The mirror pulsed again. Now, I sat at a desk, staring at a blank page. I wasn't writing. I was waiting, for words, for time, for permission. My fingers hovered above the keys, unsure but hopeful. "These are echoes," the clockmaker said softly beside me. "Not of time, but of feeling." I nodded, unable to speak. The mirror showed more. Not grand events. Not triumphs or tragedies. Just quiet, flickering instants. The smell of oranges on a winter morning. The way dust danced in the sunlight of an empty room. The sound of my grandmother's clock ticking in a distant hallway. Things I hadn't forgotten, but things I hadn't remembered either. They had simply been waiting, tucked safely in the folds of time. "You've always carried these," the clockmaker said. "But we rarely pause long enough to notice them." I stepped closer to the mirror, and for the first time, it reflected me as I was now. But even that image shimmered, soft around the edges, like I was being remembered instead of remembered myself. I thought mirrors showed us who we are, I whispered. This one shows you where you've been, he replied. And sometimes, that's the same thing. He handed me a small token, a sliver of polished glass, smooth as water. It's part of the mirror, he said. Keep it with you. It will shimmer when you're close to a moment worth noticing. I held it gently in my palm. It was cool, but not cold. And as I looked into it, I saw nothing, yet felt everything. We left the room without closing the door. The stars above it kept spinning. Back in the main room of the cottage, I noticed the clocks ticking even more softly than before. As if they, too, had seen something in the mirror. As if time itself had been reminded of its gentler nature. I sat once more in the crescent moon chair, letting the hush settle over me. The mirror, the garden, the ticking, it all blurred into one slow breath. Not past. Not future. Just this moment. Here. Now. And slowly, gently, like a leaf drifting toward the forest floor, I let myself rest in the stillness. Chapter 4, The Windmill That Measured Thought. There are places where thoughts move slowly, where they do not rush in, unannounced and noisy, but rather arrive like guests, removing their shoes at the door and settling in beside you, quietly waiting to be noticed. I found such a place one morning when the mist in the forest lingered longer than usual. The path revealed itself gently again, but this time it led me not to the front door of the clockmaker's cottage, but to a winding trail behind it. The air smelled of time and old stories. Leaves didn't crunch beneath my feet, they sighed, as if releasing tiny memories with each step I took. The clockmaker met me near the garden gate, though he hadn't said he would. Somehow, he always knew. Today, he said, holding out a thin silver key shaped like a feather, you'll be visiting the windmill. He didn't say which way to go, nor did he walk beside me this time. But I wasn't worried. The key was warm in my hand, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat, and somehow I knew where to go. The trail narrowed, lined with lavender and soft earth. I walked slowly, the way one walks through a memory they don't want to disturb. The world around me grew even quieter, but not in a lonely way. It was the kind of quiet that listens, that makes room for thinking. At the top of a gentle hill, nestled among fields of soft grass and silver-winged butterflies, stood the windmill. Its blades turned not with wind, but with rhythm, slow and patient, each rotation matching the pulse in my palm. The walls were made of dark wood, faded with age and carved with swirling patterns like the rings inside a tree. Small windows dotted its sides, round and glowing faintly, like sleepy eyes. Inside, the air was thick with stillness. Shelves lined the walls, filled with glass jars. Each jar held a single strand of silver thread, suspended in stillness, gently swirling inside like a captured breeze. There were labels, tiny parchment tags with phrases written in delicate script. An idea before sleep. A question never asked. The name of a bird I once knew. At the center of the room stood a chair, spun from vines, woven into the shape of a spiral. Above it hung a large circular device, something between a clock and a compass. It moved slowly, its needle not ticking, but gliding. I sat in the chair, and the windmill shifted. Not loudly. Not even visibly. But I felt it, like the room had begun to think along with me. One of the glass jars on a nearby shelf began to glow. The silver thread inside unwound itself slightly, revealing a faint image, me, sitting by a lake, watching the ripples move outward. I wasn't doing anything. Just thinking. And in that moment, I remembered exactly what I had been thinking back then, a question without an answer, one I had left behind in the rush of days. Another jar lit up. Then another. Some thoughts were familiar. Others were so small, I had forgotten they ever existed, half thoughts, almost thoughts, beginnings of wonder that had never quite bloomed. The windmill spun slowly above me, and with each turn, I felt more of myself arriving, not as a single stream of thought, but as a gentle unfolding of layered reflections. This place wasn't about solving or deciding. It was about holding. Holding the weightless weight of thought. Of wondering. Of being. The walls began to hum, faintly, a resonance that moved through my bones like a lullaby made of silence. The chair creaked beneath me, not from wear, but from comfort, like it was shifting to match my shape. I closed my eyes. And for the first time in a long time, I thought without trying. I remembered the feel of a page beneath my fingertips. The moment before rain. The breath you take before speaking something true. There were no answers in the windmill. Only reminders. That thinking is not always about reaching. Sometimes, it's about resting within the question. When I finally stood, the jars returned to stillness, their silver threads curling gently like sleeping cats. The spinning device above me gave one final glide and paused, its needle pointing inward, toward the center of the room, the center of me. Outside, the grass waved gently as I descended the hill. The clockmaker waited at the gate, holding a soft cloth in his hands. "For your thoughts," he said, offering it. "So they don't get dusty." I smiled. It was the kind of gift that made sense only here, in this world where thoughts had weight and windmills spun without wind. Back in the cottage, I placed the cloth beside the wooden clock and the silver bell. All the objects now formed a small gathering, a pocket of stillness I carried with me. And as I sat once more in the crescent-shaped chair, the ticking of the clock slowed to match the pace of a single, unspoken truth. Not all thoughts are meant to be finished. Some are simply meant to be felt. Chapter 5, The Library of Unwritten Hours. It was just before dawn, or something like it, when I found myself returning once again. This time, the forest did not wait for me to decide. It met me halfway. The trees leaned in kindly, parting to show me the way, and the mossy stones beneath my feet glowed faintly, as though lighting the path from within. It felt less like I was walking forward and more like I was being gently pulled, by memory, by rhythm, by time itself. The cottage stood as always, quiet and unchanged, but the air around it was different. Heavier with meaning. Lighter with grace. The door opened at my touch, and the clockmaker greeted me not with words, but with a simple nod. He was holding a small lantern, inside which floated a single, slow-turning feather. Its color changed with each breath, silver to blue to gold, and then to something not found in any ordinary palette. "You're ready," he said softly, handing me the lantern. "For the library." The phrase stirred something in me, a memory I hadn't yet had. Without another word, he led me through a narrow stairwell hidden beneath the floorboards, the steps carved of smooth stone, warm beneath my feet. The ticking of the clocks above grew distant, replaced by a gentle hush, as if we were descending into the belly of silence itself. At the bottom, a door stood, tall, round-topped, etched with flowing letters that rearranged themselves the longer I looked. The Library of Unwritten Hours. When the door opened, I felt the shift at once. It was not a room, but a world. Shelves curved endlessly in all directions, not stacked in rigid lines but woven into loops, spirals, and drifting towers. They floated gently above the ground, connected by threads of light that shimmered when I looked at them too closely. There were no books on the shelves. Not in the usual sense. Instead, there were objects. A string tied around a pebble. A folded napkin with a single word scribbled across it. A tiny bell that never rang. A mitten missing its pair. Each item pulsed softly, and I understood, without needing to ask, that these were all ours, unwritten, unspent, unspoken. This is where time gathers before it chooses its shape, the clockmaker whispered beside me. Before it becomes action. Before it becomes memory. These are the hours that almost happened. I walked slowly between the shelves. As I passed, some of the objects began to glow faintly. They were familiar, not because I recognized them, but because I recognized what they represented. Moments I nearly lived. A letter I never sent. A kindness I thought of offering, but didn't. A walk I almost took, when the air smelled of spring and the rain was far off but near enough to feel. These hours are not lost, he said gently, only waiting. We came to a table shaped like a spiral, carved from a single tree whose rings were visible across its surface. Upon it rested a blank book and a pen made of soft, curved glass. I sat. The book opened itself. But instead of pages, there were layers, thin as air, shimmering with possibilities. I lifted the pen, unsure what to write. You don't need to write what was, he said. Only what could have been. What still might be. Or what simply deserves to exist in thought. So I wrote. Not in sentences, but in images. A sunrise never witnessed. The warmth of a hand I never held. A song hummed under breath while walking beside someone I never met. The words poured softly, like sand through fingers. I didn't need to control them. They arrived gently, settled calmly, and stayed. When I stopped, the pen pulsed once with quiet light. The book closed itself, and the glow of the objects around me softened, as if they, too, had been written into peace. You have honored them, said the clockmaker. That is all they ever wanted. I rose from the table and looked back once more at the shelves. Though I could have stayed for hours, perhaps had stayed already for many, I felt no urgency. Only quiet. Only stillness. Back at the top of the stairs, the lantern still flickered in my hand. The feather inside had turned a pale, cloud-like white. It no longer spun. It rested. Inside the cottage, the clocks welcomed me home with a slow, soft chorus of sound. Not ticking. Breathing. I sat once more in the crescent moon chair, and in the warmth of that little room, I realized something gently true. The hours we never live still live within us. And they, too, are part of our story. Chapter 6, The Cloudsmith's Workshop. There are moments when the sky itself seems to remember. When clouds drift not as weather, but as stories, soft, weightless thoughts gathered into form. The clockmaker must have seen it in my eyes that day, the way I paused just a moment longer at the window, watching the sky ripple like silk in slow motion. He didn't ask me anything. He simply reached into a drawer I hadn't noticed before and pulled out a folded square of pale fabric. It looked like linen, but shimmered faintly with light from no clear source. As he unfolded it, I saw that it was a map, one that didn't show places, but currents. Sky currents. Threads of wind, looped and labeled not with directions, but with emotions. Curiosity. Drift. Yearning. Quiet. He handed me the map without a word, then opened the back door of the cottage, which led not into the forest as it usually did, but into the sky itself. There were no steps. Just a path of clouds, winding gently upward, soft but certain beneath my feet. The higher I walked, the quieter the world below became. The trees grew smaller. The wind grew softer. The air smelled of rain that hadn't fallen, and old cotton, and something sweet like the first breath after a long sleep. At the end of the path stood a workshop. It rested on a cluster of thick clouds, anchored by ropes of woven mist. Its walls were stitched from driftwood and feathered fabric. Its roof was made of upside-down umbrellas, all slowly spinning. Inside, the air shimmered. It wasn't hot or cold, just light. Like the kind of light you feel on your skin in a dream. The cloudsmith greeted me without turning around. He was tall and gentle, his shoulders cloaked in a shawl of woven cirrus. His hands moved slowly over a stretch of vapor spread out across a work table, shaping it the way one might knead dough or spin wool. "You're here to learn," he said simply, as if I'd known that all along. I watched as he drew a curved needle from a box of soft light and threaded it with what looked like moonlight. With graceful, silent movements, he began stitching together pieces of cloud. Each piece whispered as it was sewn. Not in words, but in memories. A kite forgotten in a tree. A nap in the back seat of a moving car. The way curtains move in the afternoon sun. "These are fragments of sky moments," the cloudsmith explained, offering me a piece to hold. "Memories too light to keep, but too meaningful to lose." I cradled the fragment in my hands. It weighed almost nothing, and yet I could feel it echo through my chest. Not like thunder, but like a name spoken very softly. He gestured for me to try. I took a strip of gentle cloud and laid it across the table. My fingers, though unsure, knew how to move, guided not by logic, but by sensation. I began to stitch, slowly, letting each motion follow a rhythm I didn't know I remembered. As I worked, thoughts floated to the surface of my mind. A breeze that had once made me pause while crossing a bridge. The sight of a single bird circling above a silent lake. The feel of someone brushing lint from my sleeve without saying a word. Each memory became a thread. Each thread became a seam. The cloudsmith nodded with approval, saying nothing. In time, the stitched cloud lifted from the table, held together by the lightness of what it carried. It drifted upward and joined the ceiling, where dozens of other memory clouds hovered, each softly glowing with the essence of a moment never spoken aloud. "They'll drift for a while," he said, "and then return to the world. Perhaps as dreams. Or as quiet thoughts that arrive when someone needs them most." I looked up, and I knew, some of these clouds had already visited me. In the waiting room. In the soft rain. In the silence between someone's question and my answer. When it was time to go, the cloudsmith handed me a small pouch made from morning fog. For storing light thoughts, he said. The kind that slip through fingers if not kept somewhere soft. I thanked him, though the words felt too heavy for a place so weightless. Still, he smiled, as though he heard the gratitude behind them. I stepped out of the workshop and walked the cloud path back down to the cottage, slower this time. The wind at my back didn't push me, it accompanied me, like a gentle hand resting on my shoulder. Inside the cottage, the clockmaker had brewed tea that smelled faintly of sky. He said nothing, but placed the cup in front of me and nodded toward the crescent moon chair. I sat, and as I sipped, I noticed the ticking of the clocks had changed again. Not faster. Not slower. Just, lighter. Like clouds passing overhead that you only notice if you take the time to look up. Chapter 7, The Watchtower of Gentle Endings. There is a hush that comes not with silence, but with acceptance. A quietness that doesn't demand stillness, but offers it, like a chair placed beneath a tree, or a sigh that doesn't need a reply. The clockmaker told me that morning with a glance, no words, no gestures, only the way he looked toward the horizon through the round window at the back of the cottage. The time has come, he said at last, for you to visit the watchtower. He handed me a stone. It was smooth, oval-shaped, and warm to the touch, not from sunlight, but from something older, like a memory that had never cooled. You won't need a path today, he said. Only patience. And so I walked. Not toward anywhere in particular, only onward. The forest changed around me. The trees grew taller, but their leaves more sparse. The air was still fragrant, but lighter, with notes of dried petals and parchment. Birds didn't sing here. Instead, I heard the sound of wind through tall grass, and the slow rustle of things settling into place. I climbed a low ridge and found the watchtower. It wasn't grand. It wasn't tall. It didn't look like it had been built, it looked like it had grown, stone by stone, from the earth's breath. Vines curled up its base, not in haste, but in companionship. Its windows were few, but wide, and round like eyes that had been watching gently for a very long time. I stepped inside. There was no door. Only an opening shaped like the pause before a goodbye. Inside, it was empty. But not vacant. Every stone, every beam, every floating dust particle felt arranged, chosen. As though the space itself had been listening for centuries. At the center of the tower was a spiral staircase. I ascended slowly, my fingers brushing the smooth curve of the wall as I climbed. With every step, I felt something ease. A knot somewhere in me loosened. A name I hadn't spoken in years surfaced, not with pain, but with calm remembrance. At the top was a single room with open air on all sides. No glass in the windows. No ceiling, just sky. In the middle stood a table with 4 objects placed in a circle, a candle that had never been lit, a bundle of dried lavender, a feather made of iron, and a watch with no hands. A voice greeted me, not spoken aloud, but clear. It came not from a person, but from the tower itself, like an echo of something that had waited for the right listener. Here is where things come to end, softly. I sat by the table and understood that this was not a place of lost. It was a place of letting go. Not forgetting, but releasing. Each item on the table held a story. I didn't need to be told them. I felt them. The unlit candle held a farewell never said aloud. The lavender was a memory of comfort, shared in silence. The iron feather was the weight of something once beautiful, now grounded. The watch marked a moment not measured in time, but in readiness. I placed the smooth stone the clockmaker had given me in the center of the table. It pulsed faintly. And as it did, the four objects slowly shifted toward it. Not moved by hand, but drawn, like tides drawn to a moon they trust. They circled the stone, and then dissolved, not vanished, but changed. They became light, then wind, then scent. I closed my eyes. I saw the face of someone I once missed too deeply. I felt the tug of a regret that no longer needed to hold me. I remembered promises I made only to myself. And then, they settled. Not gone. Just, complete. When I opened my eyes, the table was clear. The wind in the tower shifted, and I knew it was time to descend. As I stepped down the spiral staircase, the tower seemed to hum. Not music. Not a tune. But a thank you. Outside, the light was different, not brighter, but fuller. The forest no longer whispered. It simply breathed. Back at the cottage, the clockmaker stood waiting with a small glass vial. He handed it to me. Inside was a single grain of sand, suspended mid-air, unmoving. For the moment you let go, he said. Keep it, but don't carry it. Let it rest near you. I placed it on the table beside the wooden clock, the bell, the cloth, the fog pouch, the cloud thread, and now this, each a part of this story I hadn't realized I was gathering. The clocks ticked softly, their rhythm matching a new pace inside me. A slower one. A kinder one. And as I sank into the crescent moon chair, I felt not tired, but gently ended.